Biblio Studio presents The Power of Metaphysics, How to Think, Feel, and Manifest Success. Chapter 1. The Mind as the Invisible Architect. We rarely stop to think about the real role the mind plays in our lives. We walk, we work, we make plans, we dream or argue, and we take for granted that thinking is simply the constant noise in our heads. Yet what we call thoughts is much more than endless murmur. It is the raw material with which we build our entire existence. The curious thing is that most people live like tenants in a house they themselves built without realizing they were the architects. In metaphysics, there is an idea that is repeated with great force. The mind is not only a mirror that reflects the world, but a brush that paints it. And it does not paint it once, but at every instant, with every thought, belief, and emotion we hold. What you see around you, your relationships, your financial situation, your health, your opportunities, is nothing more than the visible result of an invisible process happening within you. It may sound radical, but this is the first key to understanding practical metaphysics. The mind is the silent architect of our reality. Aristotle, the great Greek thinker, expressed it with a lucidity that crosses the centuries. The soul never thinks without a picture. With this, he pointed to something very concrete. Everything that passes through your mind is represented in some way as an inner image. Even when you think you are thinking in words, in reality, your mind is summoning scenes, symbols, mental forms that accompany those words. If you say, "I want prosperity," your mind projects images of money, calm, achievements, spacious homes, or travel. If you say, "I am afraid," your mind produces images of threat, of darkness, of falling. Those images are invisible seeds, and like all seeds, sooner or later, they find soil in which to grow. To better understand this principle, think of a glass. If it is clean, transparent, and well cared for, what you see through it is clear, sharp, reliable. But if that glass is dirty, stained, or cracked, everything you see on the other side will look distorted. The external world does not change. What changes is the perception you have of it. Well, your mind is exactly that glass. When it is loaded with thoughts of resentment, fear, or doubt, what you see in life is tinted by that dirt. You do not perceive what really is, but what your mental filter allows you to perceive. And since we act according to what we perceive, not what really is, we end up living in a distorted version of reality. What is fascinating is that this idea does not belong exclusively to Western philosophy. In very different cultures, we find similar intuitions. For example, in ancient China, there was a belief called the poisoned arrow of the heart. According to this tradition, a thought charged with hatred or ill intention was like an invisible arrow that could pierce not only the health of its target, but also that of the one who launched it. For them, wishing harm was an act as tangible as shooting a projectile. Exaggeration? Perhaps. But if we look at it with modern eyes, there is an undeniable psychological background. Hostile thinking generates physical changes in the body. It increases muscle tension, raises blood pressure, speeds up the heartbeat. And those same reactions can be perceived by those who live with us. Thoughts charged with negative emotion do not remain locked in our heads. They translate into attitudes, words, and gestures that inevitably influence others. If a single thought can alter the biochemistry of your own body, what might it do when sustained day after day for years? That is why metaphysics insists on the discipline of watching the mind. Watching does not mean repressing, but learning to observe with honesty. What images do you hold most often? What stories do you repeat within yourself? What is the silent narrative that governs your decisions? The mind never rests. It is always creating. The point is that it creates what you feed it, whether positive or negative. An example I especially like to illustrate this truth is found in the life of Hypatia of Alexandria. In the 4th century, when being a woman and devoting oneself to philosophy was practically an act of defiance, she would gather her disciples in plazas and gardens. She had no blackboards or luxury instruments, so she would take a stick and draw in the sand the geometric diagrams she explained. To anyone's eyes, those fleeting drawings seemed insignificant. The wind could erase them in seconds, the crowd could trample them and make them disappear. But the essential was not in the sand, but in the minds of her students. Hypatia knew that when an idea is clearly planted in the mind, nothing and no one can erase it. Those traces in the earth were simply a means to ignite images in the consciousness of those who listened to her. The teaching is powerful. You do not need ideal conditions to begin transforming your life. You do not need wealth, titles, or perfect environments. Hypatia did not need marble classrooms or private libraries. She only needed conviction and clarity. You too do not need everything outside to change before you begin to change inside. It is enough to recognize that the true playing field is in your mind. Now then, this revelation can be liberating or terrifying. Liberating, because it gives you the certainty that you are not merely a product of circumstances. You have real power to redesign your life from within. Terrifying, because it also forces you to take responsibility. You can no longer blame chance, luck, your boss, your parents, or the government for everything that happens in your world. Of course, external factors exist, but the way you interpret, use, and integrate them depends on the quality of your mind. Imagine entering a house you built years ago and discovering that the walls are crooked, the roof leaks, and the foundations tremble. What would you do? Would you blame the bricks, the wood, or the cement? You would probably recognize that the error was in the blueprint, in the way the project was designed. The same is true of life. If there is something you dislike about your current experience, it is useless to blame the materials. What must be done is to review the mental blueprint you designed, consciously or unconsciously, and dare to redraw it. Here is where your journey with this book begins. Not as a manual of magical formulas, but as a process of observation and redesign. For the mind, when left unattended, repeats old blueprints full of mistakes, but when trained, it becomes a masterful architect. Your task is to begin cleaning your glass, observing your inner images, and deciding, with courage, what house you want to live in from now on. And perhaps the most important question you can ask yourself at the end of this chapter is simple yet uncomfortable. Do you want to keep living in the house you have built so far, or do you prefer to start drawing a new one? Chapter 2. The Creative Power of Thought. In the Sanskrit tradition, there is an ancient proverb that condenses, in just a few words, one of the deepest truths about the human condition. What a man thinks, that he becomes. This statement is not a poetic metaphor nor a religious exaggeration. It is the confirmation of a principle that, when we truly understand it, can shake the very foundations of our way of living. Everything you are today, what you have achieved, what you suffer, what you enjoy, and even what you fear, is intimately linked to the quality of your thoughts. You don't need to look very far to see it. Think of a person who constantly repeats, "I'm no good at this," or "everything goes wrong for me." That idea, repeated again and again, becomes a lens through which every experience is interpreted. If the person makes a mistake, it confirms it. I knew it. If they succeed, they minimize it. It must have been luck. That person ends up acting according to what they believe about themselves, and the final result is that they literally become what they feared the most. The mind is like an invisible mold. Everything we place inside that mold eventually takes its shape. Imagine water, pure, flexible, adaptable. It has no shape of its own, and yet it is enough to pour it into a glass, a cup, or a bottle for it to immediately take the silhouette of the container. The same happens with our thoughts. Consciousness is the water, and thoughts are the container that limits and directs it. If the mental mold you use is filled with fear, consciousness will take the form of fear. If it is filled with confidence, it will take the form of security. And if it is filled with vision and purpose, then your life will begin to reflect that vision. The paradox is that many times we live believing that the container is chosen by chance, by destiny, or by external circumstances. But it is not so. Every person, day after day, decides which mental mold will give shape to the water of their consciousness. This can be done consciously, by choosing thoughts that expand potential, or unconsciously, by repeating old beliefs inherited from family, culture, or past experiences. In any case, the water will always take the shape of the container. Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher known as the obscure for the depth of his thought, left for posterity an image that reinforces this idea. No man ever steps in the same river twice. The river flows, its waters change at every instant, and besides, the bather himself is no longer the same. With this, he wanted to remind us that everything in life is constant transformation. Now then, if nothing remains, how can we expect to build something solid with thoughts that are as changeable as the waters of a river? The answer lies in repetition and direction. A single thought may pass like a drop in the current, leaving no trace. But a repeated thought becomes a channel, a stream bed through which the waters tend to flow again and again. Each time you repeat an idea, you are carving the bed of your inner river, and over time, that current becomes so strong that it drags your entire experience toward the direction you have marked. This explains why people who cultivate trust and gratitude seem to attract more of the same. They have created an inner river that feeds and reinforces itself. Some examples of mental discipline are especially inspiring. During World War II, the French philosopher Simone Weil made a decision that puzzled her contemporaries. She refused to eat more than the soldiers at the front received. She, who was not in the trenches, voluntarily limited her rations so as not to allow herself a privilege that others did not have. Her body weakened to extreme levels, but what is interesting is what that practice revealed about the mind. Simone was not seeking punishment or martyrdom. She sought coherence. She did not want her thoughts of justice and empathy to remain mere abstract ideals. She wanted to embody them in her daily life, even in an act as basic as eating. Her gesture, though controversial, clearly shows that thoughts are not mere fantasies. They shape behavior, regulate the body, and define character. Weil's story may seem extreme, but it reminds us of something essential. The mind does not act in a vacuum. Every repeated thought leaves a mark on the nervous system, on body posture, on the tone of voice, on the way of looking, and even on the micro-gestures of the face. And those accumulated marks end up creating a destiny. We are not speaking of magic, but of a process as real as any physical phenomenon. You think, you feel, you act, and that set of actions creates your life. The problem arises when we let thought drift. Without realizing it, we bathe in rivers of worry, comparison, judgment, and fear. The current is so constant that we believe there is no alternative, that life is just like that. But the truth is that we can always choose another course. We can learn to patiently carve a new bed for the river, replacing limiting thoughts with images that propel us. Now, this does not mean falling into the self-deception of repeating empty phrases in the hope of miracles. Practical metaphysics goes far beyond that. It is about cultivating thoughts so honestly and consistently that little by little they become our second nature. It is not about thinking positive in a superficial sense, but about understanding that every image you hold in your mind is a seed, and sooner or later it will germinate in the form of experience. The Sanskrit proverb with which we began this chapter is not meant to decorate your agenda with pretty words. It is an uncomfortable and powerful reminder: what you think, that you become. The question is inevitable: what are you becoming right now? If you look at your current life and find situations that do not satisfy you, do not see them only as external misfortunes. Ask yourself what thoughts have sustained them, what images have nourished them, what river you have been letting flow. And if what you find does not please you, begin to carve a new channel. At first it may seem difficult, like trying to divert an entire river with your bare hands. But every different thought is a stone placed in a new channel, and every stone counts. With time, the water of your consciousness will flow more strongly through the course you choose. Remember the water that takes the shape of the container. Remember Heraclitus's river that is never the same. Remember Simone Weil disciplining her mind through a daily act. And remember, above all, that every thought you hold today is silently, yet relentlessly, sculpting the person you will be tomorrow. Chapter 3. The Power of the Subconscious. Imagine for a moment that within you there exists an immense stage, larger than any theatre ever built by man. On that stage, all the scenes of your life are performed, one after another, without rest. Some are comedies, others tragedies, others adventures, and still others monotonous repetitions of the same. The audience believes that the scenes depend on external factors: money, politics, fate, or luck. But in reality, the script is written in a far more intimate and powerful place: your subconscious mind. The English poet John Milton expressed it with disarming clarity in his work, Paradise Lost. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. Few phrases better summarize the role of the subconscious in our experience. It matters less what happens outside than the silent interpretation your mind makes of it. Two people can go through the same circumstance. One lives it as an unbearable sentence, and the other transforms it into an opportunity. Where is the difference? In that deep space of the mind where images, beliefs, and emotions are stored and operate without us always being aware of them. The subconscious works like a mirror. It does not judge, it does not opine, it does not criticize. It simply reflects back what it receives. If you feed it thoughts of fear, it returns experiences that confirm them. If you feed it images of confidence, it returns scenarios where that confidence is validated. The mirror does not decide what to show, it only reproduces. The difficulty lies in the fact that, unlike a physical mirror that reflects your face, this mental mirror reflects the ideas you repeatedly hold, even those you learned in childhood and consciously forgot. Throughout history, many cultures intuited the existence of this inner power. The Japanese samurai, for example, had a practice known as the imagined death. Before a battle, they would spend a few minutes visualizing their own death. They saw themselves fall, bleed out, lose their lives in combat. Why would they do something so grim? Because they understood that the greatest enemy was not the opponent's sword, but the fear that paralyzed them. By facing in their minds the worst that could happen, they nullified terror. Their subconscious became trained to accept any outcome, and in that acceptance they found a freedom that made them formidable in battle. That is the subconscious, a stage where mental rehearsals become emotional realities. When you rehearse fear, you live fear. When you rehearse confidence, you live confidence. The body responds to those images as if they were real, releasing hormones, tensing muscles, speeding up or calming the breath. What you imagine with enough intensity and repetition ends up conditioning your physiology and, by extension, your results. A lesser-known but equally fascinating historical example can be found in Poland in the 17th century. During the Swedish occupation, a beggar in the city of Poznan roamed the streets playing strange melodies on his violin. People took him for a harmless eccentric, yet what few knew was that those melodies concealed coded messages. Each note corresponded to a secret key used to coordinate local resistance groups. The man, apparently insignificant, used the invisible power of music as a vehicle to change the political reality around him. Something similar happens with the subconscious. At first glance, it seems passive, repetitive, almost useless. But in truth, it is an instrument capable of encoding and transmitting messages that steer the course of an entire life. Most of us underestimate that power. We believe we are masters of our conscious decisions and that the subconscious is merely a storage of memories. The truth is that, as modern psychological studies show, more than 90% of our daily behaviors are automatic, governed by subconscious programs. When you drive a car, when you type on a keyboard, when you respond with a gesture to an emotion, it is your subconscious that acts. And it does so not because it is intelligent in the rational sense, but because it has learned to repeat what you have taught it. That is why, if you have spent years repeating thoughts of scarcity, your subconscious becomes a violinist that always plays the same sad melody over and over again. And the same happens in reverse. If you feed it with thoughts of expansion, it will begin to play melodies of success and fulfillment. It does not distinguish between fiction and reality. It believes whatever you give it. The challenge is that you cannot convince it with superficial phrases alone. You can say 100 times a day, "I am happy," or "I am abundant," but if deep down you hold contrary images, the subconscious will reflect those images, not the hollow words. It requires emotion, repetition, and coherence. Exactly what the samurai did when rehearsing their deaths, or what that violinist did when repeating coded melodies until everyone learned to recognize them. Perhaps the best way to relate to your subconscious is to begin treating it as a powerful ally that needs clear direction. It is not your enemy, though at times it may seem so. It is like a strong and sensitive horse. It can take you to incredible places, but if you do not guide it, it can drag you along dangerous paths. Look at your current life as the result of what that horse has been following. Observe what landscapes you have crossed. Are they of abundance or scarcity, of harmony or conflict? And ask yourself, what kind of melodies have I been repeating within myself to end up here? For the subconscious does not create from nothing. It only interprets the music you give it. The power of the subconscious is immense, but it is not mysterious. It is activated by what you repeat, by what you imagine intensely, by the emotions you most nourish. So the real question you should be asking is, what melody do you want it to play from now on? Chapter 4. Words that Decree Realities. When you think of words, you may see them as simple tools of communication, as sounds that travel from one mouth to an ear. But in metaphysics, words have a much deeper value. They are decrees. Every time you speak, you are casting seeds into the field of the subconscious, and those seeds sooner or later bloom into your experience. It does not matter whether you say them in jest, in anger, or in distraction. Your subconscious mind listens and obeys without a sense of humor. Plutarch, the Greek philosopher, once said, "Every man creates the deity he worships." Although at first glance this phrase refers to religion, in reality it applies to everything we revere with our words and thoughts. If you worship the idea of scarcity, you create a deity of lack that rules over you. If you venerate trust and hope, your life is governed by those forces. In the end, the deities of which Plutarch speaks are nothing more than symbols of the mental creations we elevate with devotion. And devotion, whether we realize it or not, is expressed day after day in what we repeat with our mouths. A good example is offered by the compass. No matter how many times you shake it or turn it, it always ends up pointing north. In the same way, the words we repeat over and over act like an inner needle pointing in a fixed direction. If your words are mostly complaints, excuses, and judgments, your life will orient itself toward the north of resentment and frustration. If, on the other hand, your words are affirmations of trust, gratitude, and purpose, that needle will guide you toward experiences that reflect those states. The compass does not make mistakes. The question is what direction you are programming with your daily decrees. The ancient Romans, though unfamiliar with modern psychology, somehow understood the power of the word. They often wrote their wishes or curses on lead tablets and threw them into wells, fountains, or rivers. They believed that by inscribing their words on metal and delivering them to the water, those words were sealed as commands to the universe. Some of these tablets, discovered centuries later, contain petitions so specific that they are strikingly similar to our current practices of decrees or affirmations. They asked for everything from prosperity to a rival's failure in a race. For them, writing and pronouncing those words was a sacred act, a contract with the invisible. Today, with our electronic calendars and social networks, we continue doing something similar without realizing it. We write what we think, we declare aloud what we believe about ourselves and the world, and each word leaves a mark on the collective unconscious and on our own subconscious. The difference is that we no longer throw lead tablets into water, but phrases into the digital air. Yet the principle remains the same. What you decree moves toward its fulfillment. A dramatic example of the power to create and to destroy can be found in the legend of the Prague clockmaker. At the end of the 16th century, this craftsman built an astronomical clock so perfect and beautiful that the rulers feared he might replicate his work in another city. To make sure that never happened, they blinded him. From then on, that clock, though majestic, was never again repaired with the mastery of its creator. Beyond the cruelty of the story, the interesting point is the metaphysical teaching. When a work is born of the clarity and precision of the mind, it becomes a materialized decree. The clock was not merely a mechanism of gears, it was the incarnation of the artisan's mental vision. What was first a blueprint within him became, through words, calculations, and actions, a reality that still amazes those who contemplate it today. Your words work the same way. Each one is like a piece in the gearwork of your own vital clock. You may not notice it immediately, but every declaration you sustain in your daily life builds a mechanism that sooner or later marks the hour of your experience. If you constantly repeat that you can't, that gear slows your steps. If you repeat that you can and act accordingly, the clock begins to move with a more agile and precise rhythm. The key is to understand that your decrees are not mere sounds. They are commands to the subconscious, and this, as we have already seen, acts like a mirror that does not judge, it only reflects. If your word is clear, strong, and consistent, the reflection will be as well. If your word is ambiguous, contradictory, or laden with doubt, the reflection will show that same ambiguity. Here I propose a simple but powerful exercise. Listen carefully to what you say throughout a day. Not what you think, but what you actually pronounce out loud. Write down how many times you say, "I can't," "How hard this is," "I'm so unlucky," or similar phrases. Then write down how many times you affirm, "I can," "I'm going to make it," "This too shall pass." You will be surprised to see where your verbal compass is pointing. That inventory is the first step in becoming aware of the decrees you issue without realizing it. Words do not need to be solemn or recited at an altar to have power. Most of the time, what we decree happens in the everyday, at the dining table, in a phone call, at the office. There, in the midst of the ordinary, we release phrases that become architects of our destiny. And like the Romans with their tablets, although they may seem small acts, they are charged with intention and consequence. This chapter aims to leave you with a clear conviction. Every word you pronounce is a seed, and every seed has the vocation to germinate. Do not underestimate the force of your language. Turn your words into a workshop where realities are forged, and not into a landfill where complaints pile up. With each phrase, you choose whether you approach the majestic clock of the Prague artisan or condemn your life to the darkness of gears rusted by decrees of fear and distrust. Your subconscious, like the compass, is already listening. The direction it points to depends on what you decide to say today. Chapter 5. The Hidden Language of Imagination. If the word has the power to decree, imagination is the secret workshop where those decrees are designed before being released into the world. We often believe that imagination is a child's game, a kind of distraction for artists, dreamers, or visionaries. Yet every great discovery, every social transformation, and every human advance was first born on the invisible screen of imagination. It is there where we rehearse possible futures, where we test combinations that do not yet exist, and where we give shape to what we later call reality. The philosopher Blaise Pascal once wrote, "Imagination rules the world." And he did not say it in a fit of romanticism, but as a logical observation. What rules is not brute force or chance, but the images human beings are capable of sustaining collectively. A nation is not founded with bricks, but with the vision of a group of people who imagine laws, symbols, borders. An invention does not arise from iron or copper, but from the mind that first imagines how those materials might combine. Even personal relationships are built upon images, the idea you have of yourself and the one you project onto others. Imagination is the laboratory where experience is prefigured. And the curious thing is that, even when we sometimes dismiss it, we use it constantly. When you worry, what you are doing is imagining negative future scenarios. When you feel hopeful, you are imagining favorable possibilities. In both cases, your body reacts, your heart races, your hormones shift, your decisions are altered. What you imagine has the power to anticipate and direct what you later call reality. A simple example may clarify this idea. Think of the moon. At night it lights up the sky with a glow that has inspired poems, songs, and rituals for millennia. Yet the moon has no light of its own. What we see shining is a reflection of the sun. That is how imagination works. It does not produce out of nothing, but reflects and amplifies the light of what already exists as possibility. If you direct your imagination toward trust, it will reflect the sun of abundance. If you direct it toward fear, it will reflect the shadow of your doubts. The moon does not choose to shine or to darken. It depends on the direction in which it receives the light. Your imagination is the same. It depends on the source on which you choose to focus your attention. What is fascinating is that ancient cultures already intuited this creative power of images. In the Hebrew tradition, for example, the alphabet was not seen merely as a set of letters to form words, but as sacred formulas capable of creating realities. Each letter had a numerical and vibratory value, and it was believed that when properly combined, they could give rise to forms of energy that shaped the world. They were not mere graphic signs, they were keys to access subtler planes of existence. In a way, this view coincides with what we understand today in metaphysics, that symbols and images sustained with sufficient conviction act as programs that guide experience. Imagination, then, is not a secondary activity, but the secret language with which we dialogue with reality. The problem is that instead of using it consciously, many employ it as an automatic mechanism of worry. And so, unknowingly, they spend hours imagining misfortunes that never happen, but which do leave emotional and physical marks on the body. It is as if you were using a magic brush to paint on a dark canvas, and then were surprised that the room filled with shadows. Philosophy also warns us of a paradoxical aspect of imagination. The so-called ship of Theseus is a classic example. The Greeks asked themselves, if you gradually replace all the parts of a ship, one plank, then another, then the sails, then the mast, does it remain the same ship? And if with the old pieces you build another, which of the two is the real ship of Theseus? The paradox illustrates something fundamental. Identity is not a fixed thing, but a construction that depends on how we imagine it. Likewise, we ourselves are constantly changing, new selves, new experiences, new beliefs. Yet we continue to hold the idea that I am the same as always. What keeps us united is not the matter, but the mental image we have of ourselves. This leads us to a powerful conclusion. If your identity is, to a great extent, a work of imagination, then you can also reimagine it. You are not condemned to repeat the same script forever. You can choose to change the pieces of your inner ship and rebuild with them a renewed version of yourself. And what determines which of the two yous is the true one will ultimately be the image you sustain with the greatest conviction. Imagination does not ask for permission. It works constantly, whether you want it to or not. The difference between those who move forward and those who stagnate is that the former use it consciously, while the latter let it drift. Imagine someone who repeats every day, I am useless, nobody loves me, everything goes wrong for me. That person does not need external enemies. Their imagination is already working against them, creating images that their subconscious accepts as decrees. In contrast, someone who allows themselves to visualize a different future, even if it is not yet before them, begins to program within themselves the conditions to make it possible. Here is where metaphysical practice gains immense value. It is not enough to utter positive phrases. They must be accompanied by vivid images. The subconscious mind is not moved so much by words as by scenes charged with emotion. If you want prosperity, it is not enough to repeat, I am prosperous. Vividly imagine what your day, your surroundings, your sensations would be like if you were already living that prosperity. If you want peace, do not stop at saying it. Create images of calm, of harmonious spaces, of tranquil breathing. Those scenes, repeated, are what gradually convince the subconscious that this is the direction to follow. Remember, the moon shines because it reflects the sun. The Hebrew alphabet functioned as a creative formula because each symbol evoked an energy. The ship of Theseus reminds us that identity is flexible and reconfigurable, and Pascal warns us that, in the end, it is imagination that rules the world. With those keys in mind, the question is inevitable. What images rule your world today? If you discover that they are images of fear, scarcity, or defeat, do not punish yourself. Simply recognize that you have been using your magic brush to paint shadows and decide to start painting light. Your imagination does not run out. It is an inexhaustible source of creation. The only thing you need is to direct it toward that which you wish to experience. Chapter 6. The Mind as Creative Energy. There is a silent belief, shared across almost every culture, that true power does not lie in weapons, money, or material conquests, but in the to govern one's own mind. A Hebrew proverb sums it up with a force that transcends the centuries. He who rules his mind is mightier than he who conquers cities. Think about that for a moment. Any general can occupy a territory with soldiers and artillery, but what good is it to win an empire if within oneself one lives enslaved by anxiety, fear, or resentment? True strength is inward, and the hardest conquest is not found on maps, but within thoughts. The mind is energy in motion, though we often perceive it as something ethereal. Every thought is a vibration that alters our physiology, changes our emotion, and affects the way we relate to the world. Imagine fire. In the hands of a cook, it transforms raw ingredients into a nourishing feast. In the hands of the careless, it burns down forests and homes. Fire is not good or bad, it is energy. The same is true of thoughts. The mind can be the fire that illuminates and nourishes, or the blaze that destroys and consumes. The difference lies in mastery, in the conscious direction of that force. This principle was illustrated dramatically by one of history's most singular geniuses, Nikola Tesla. In 1898, while experimenting with a small mechanical resonance device in his New York laboratory, he discovered something astonishing. That device, little bigger than an alarm clock, produced vibrations so precise that they began to transmit through the building's beams. Neighbors felt tremors, windows shook, walls creaked. Alarmed, they called the police. Realizing the danger, Tesla had to smash the device with a hammer to stop the resonance. The extraordinary thing is that with a tiny apparatus, he nearly brought down an entire building. So too does the mind operate. A single thought may seem harmless, but when repeated with precision, with frequency, and with emotion, it generates resonances capable of moving entire structures in our lives. What begins as a small idea can become a persistent vibration that passes through relationships, opportunities, and decisions until reality itself begins to tremble in tune with that idea. Those who understand this principle know that their thoughts are not innocent games. They are resonance devices that, when well used, can topple walls of limitation and open spaces of creation. But to reach that level of inner influence, practice is needed. Goethe, the German poet, had a curious method that reflects this mental training. He would walk through forests and fields while composing complete verses in his mind before writing down a single word on paper. He said that the movement of the body stimulated the movement of thought, and that nature, with its rhythms and silences, acted as a background music that connected him with the deepest part of his being. Thus, each walk became a kind of creative laboratory where ideas vibrated until they organized themselves into poetry. His example reminds us that mastering the mind does not always require seclusion or rigidity, but rather learning to listen to one's inner energy and accompany it with habits that enhance it. Instead of forcing inspiration, Goethe knew how to let the mind tune itself in contact with life, and that tuning allowed him to create works that still resonate with millions of readers today. If you look at your current life, you will see that it too is governed by the resonance of your thoughts. What you repeat most often in silence becomes a persistent vibration. If you repeat doubts, those doubts end up infecting your decisions and your results. If you repeat confidence, that confidence creates an echo that attracts experiences where you can exercise it. You don't need to shout your thoughts for them to have an effect. It is enough to hold them silently, like a tuning fork that continues vibrating even after being struck. The challenge, then, is to consciously direct that energy. Just as Tesla had to destroy his device once he understood it could cause disaster, we too need to interrupt in time certain thoughts that threaten to topple our inner stability. At the same time, we must maintain and strengthen those thoughts that build, illuminate, and expand our lives. The energy of the mind is malleable. It is more like a river than a rock. If you channel it, it waters fields and produces harvests. If you abandon it, it overflows and devastates everything. Mastering the mind does not mean repressing it, but learning to give it a course. And that course is built with daily discipline, observing what you think, replacing what destroys with what builds, practicing calm, feeding imagination with images of fulfillment. The Hebrew proverb with which we began this chapter is not an ancient ornament. It is both a warning and a promise. He who rules his mind, even if he has no riches or armies, possesses a strength no external conqueror can take away. And he who does not, even if he amasses external victories, lives as a slave to an untamed energy that drags him along. The good news is that this mastery is not the privilege of a chosen few. It is within reach of anyone willing to train. It is enough to begin observing the quality of your thoughts as you would the quality of a fire. Are you using that energy to cook your future or to burn down your present? Remember Tesla and his resonance device. The small can produce gigantic effects if it vibrates with precision. Remember Goethe composing verses while walking. The mind is strengthened when it finds its own natural rhythm. And remember, above all, that every thought you hold is energy in action. If you learn to govern that energy, you will be conquering the most valuable territory of all, your own inner life. Chapter 7. Faith as a Hidden Engine. We have all heard the word faith at some point, but few understand it in its full magnitude. For some, faith is a religious concept linked to temples and dogmas. For others, it is nothing more than a naive illusion, a kind of unfounded optimism. However, in metaphysics, faith is something far more concrete and profound. It is the silent energy that moves life in one direction or another, even if we do not always notice it. Marcus Aurelius, emperor and Stoic philosopher, once wrote, "The whole world is change, and life itself is what you think of it." With this reflection, he invites us to look beyond external facts and to recognize that what we think, and ultimately what we believe, determines how we experience the constant change of the universe. Faith, then, is not simply waiting for something to happen. It is the certainty that gives form to what we think and feel in the face of life's perpetual movement. Imagine atmospheric pressure. It is invisible, you cannot touch it or see it, but its force holds airplanes weighing hundreds of tons in the air. There is nothing magical about it. It is physics, it is law, even if it remains outside our direct perception. Faith operates in much the same way. It is unseen, unmeasurable by instruments, but it sustains the projects, decisions, and paths of those who practice it. Whoever believes in the possibility of achieving something rises above doubts, just as an airplane rises above the clouds thanks to a force we cannot see. Curiously, different cultures have recognized this invisible power of faith, though by other names. In Tibet, for example, monks practiced a discipline called tulpamancy. It consisted of creating mental forms so vivid and consistent that over time they seemed to take on a life of their own. A monk could imagine a companion for meditation so strongly that others would sense his presence in the room. This was not a game of fantasy, but a rigorous mental training to test how far faith, sustained in an image, could turn the invisible into a palpable reality. Tulpamancy is a radical reminder that faith is not a mere passive feeling. It is a creative energy that shapes experience. And like any energy, it can be used in opposite directions. Here arises a paradox worth understanding. Faith and fear are essentially the same force. Both are certainties projected into the unknown. To have faith is to say, what does not yet exist will exist for me. To have fear is to say the same, but in reverse. What does not yet exist will come to destroy me. In both cases, the subconscious receives the order to prepare the ground for the expectation to be fulfilled. This is why we so often find that fears tend to materialize, not because the universe is cruel, but because fear is nothing more than inverted faith. When held with enough emotion, it becomes a decree. It is like watering the wrong seed. It will grow, whether you want it to or not. This shows that the problem is not in the strength of faith, but in the direction we choose to give it. If you think about it, much of human achievement is explained by this active faith. The inventor who keeps working despite failures believes in a possibility not yet manifested. The doctor who risks new therapies trusts that life has more paths than the known ones. The farmer who sows has no guarantee of the harvest, yet acts with the certainty that the earth will respond. Faith is the engine that moves every step, even in those who do not consider themselves spiritual. The question, then, is not whether you have faith or not. We all do. The real question is, where are you placing your faith? Because every thought repeated with conviction is an act of faith, whether toward prosperity or toward defeat. Daily life offers countless examples of how faith shapes results. The one who believes they deserve love acts, consciously or unconsciously, with gestures that attract healthy relationships. The one who believes they do not deserve it seeks, without realizing it, to confirm that belief in every bond. Faith works like a magnet. It attracts what aligns with its charge and repels what does not. It is here that metaphysics proposes a practical exercise, to examine the beliefs we sustain most strongly, because those are the true prayers of our lives. It does not matter what you say in a temple or what you write in a notebook of intentions, if, deep down, you still believe you cannot, that you do not deserve it, or that it is not for you. That negative faith is what silently orders the subconscious to build scenarios in accordance. To master faith, then, is to learn to direct it. It does not mean denying fear, but recognizing it for what it is: misdirected faith. Once you see it this way, it is no longer about fighting against it, but about redirecting that energy towards certainty in what you truly desire. Just as a pilot trusts in the air pressure he cannot see, you can learn to trust in the invisible forces that sustain your positive thoughts. If you remember only one thing from this chapter, let it be this: faith is inevitable. It is within you, whether you want it or not. The difference is that you can live like a plane lifted by invisible forces, or like one that falls for fear that those forces will fail. You choose where to aim your certainty. The whole world is change, Marcus Aurelius told us. The question is, what story do you choose to tell yourself in the midst of that change? For the faith you hold will be the engine that drives your course, for better or for worse. Chapter 8. The Power of Visualization. If until now we have spoken about the power of thought and faith, in this chapter we delve into one of the most practical and surprising tools of metaphysics: visualization. It is the ability to create mental images so clear and vivid that the subconscious accepts them as real and, consequently, works to materialize them. An anonymous Greek author wrote centuries ago, "Thought is the secret architect of destiny." Few phrases better describe the essence of visualization. Every time you imagine something with conviction, you are drawing invisible blueprints that your subconscious translates into instructions. It does not matter whether those blueprints are of fear or of hope. the mind accepts them and builds from them. Visualization is not a modern self-help trick. It is an innate human capacity. The problem is that instead of using it in our favor, most people employ it against themselves. When you worry about the future, you are practicing negative visualization. You create detailed scenes of what you fear, and those scenes produce emotions that condition your behavior, which increases the likelihood that you will, in fact, experience what you imagined. That is why learning to consciously visualize what you do want is like learning to guide a wild horse. You are already riding it every day, but now you can steer it where you choose. Imagine a pendulum swinging back and forth. At first it moves with force, then less and less, until it finally comes to rest at a point of balance. The mind works in a similar way. When agitated, it swings between contradictory images, hope and fear, confidence and doubt. But with practice, we can calm that oscillation and allow imagination to focus in one direction. Visualization is that state in which the mental pendulum stops swinging and points firmly toward what we want to experience. Throughout history, some geniuses have shown just how much visualization can become an instrument of discovery. One of them was Al-Biruni, the Persian astronomer of the 11th century. In an era when technical resources were limited, he managed to predict eclipses with astonishing precision. How did he do it? His secret lay in the ability to visualize celestial movements in his mind. He imagined the sky as a constantly turning mechanism, followed with his mind the orbits of the moon and the sun, and from that visualization came calculations that seemed impossible for his time. While others observed passively, Al-Biruni rehearsed within his mind the future scenarios of the cosmos. His example demonstrates that visualization is not fantasy. It is a form of practical knowledge that allows us to anticipate events. But not only sages or scientists have used it. Mahatma Gandhi, while in prison, wrote reflections and notes on simple scraps of paper because he had no other material. On those pieces, he inscribed not only political ideas, but images of the free country he dreamed of. Each written word was a mental scene he had already seen within himself. That sustained vision kept him strong, even in the solitude of a cell. When India achieved independence years later, many saw Gandhi as the great political leader. But in reality, what he had done was stubbornly sustain a visualization so clear that it became collective destiny. Visualization has a special power because it combines thought, emotion, and image. It is not enough to say, "I want peace," or "I want success." The subconscious is not impressed by empty words. It needs scenes. It needs to feel that it is already happening. If you want peace, vividly imagine the place, the posture, the breathing that accompany that state. If you want success, imagine the phone call in which you receive the good news, the faces of those congratulating you, the feeling of gratitude in your chest. The clearer the scene, the more real it will be to your subconscious, and the more willing it will be to guide you toward it. Some people think that visualizing is deceiving oneself, as if fabricating illusions. But the truth is that we all visualize continuously, only automatically. The one who fears losing their job imagines every detail of that loss. The one who suspects illness recreates in their mind the hospital room. That, too, is visualization, though negative. What metaphysics proposes is to harness this natural capacity and use it consciously to plant images that build instead of destroy. The practice requires patience. Just as the pendulum takes time to stop, the mind takes time to focus. At first, it is difficult to hold attention on a single image without distraction. But with consistency, the subconscious learns to recognize those scenes as commands, and then small coincidences begin to occur that seem magical. an unexpected encounter, a providential call, an opportunity that arises. These are not miracles in the supernatural sense, but resonances. The outer world begins to align with the image sustained within. Remember, visualization is not a luxury for dreamers, it is an instrument of construction. The Persian sages like Al-Biruni knew it, Gandhi applied it from his cell, and you practice it every time you think about the future. The question is not whether you visualize or not, but what you are visualizing. Are they scenarios of fear or of trust? Images of defeat or of victory? If you want to begin experiencing the power of this tool, I suggest something simple. Before going to sleep, spend 5 minutes recreating a desired scene as if it were already happening. It does not matter if it is small, a kind conversation, a finished project, a feeling of calm. Make it vivid, with colors, sounds, and emotions. That image, planted just before rest, will be engraved in your subconscious and will begin to work through the night. Thought is the secret architect of destiny, that Greek phrase reminds us. And the drawing that this architect traces is called visualization. In your hands lies the power to decide which blueprints you hand over to your subconscious, those of a solid and luminous building or those of a ruin already foreseen. The choice, as always, is yours. Chapter 9. Energy in Motion, Emotion and Creation. Every thought, no matter how abstract it may seem, carries an emotional charge of energy. There is no such thing as a neutral idea. Each thought awakens a vibration in the body, a shade in the mood, an impulse toward action or toward paralysis. This energy, often underestimated, is what turns thoughts into creators or destroyers of experiences. Thinking is not a harmless act. It is the ignition of small sparks that, if sustained, can become fires that either illuminate or consume. An Eastern proverb expresses it with simplicity and force. An idea is like a spark. Just one is enough to set an entire forest ablaze. That spark can be the inspiration that changes your life or the obsession that ruins it. The difference lies in how you feed it. A spark of enthusiasm, if protected from the wind of doubt and fueled with the wood of action, becomes a creative fire. A spark of resentment, on the other hand, if watered with repeated thoughts, grows into a destructive blaze. Never underestimate the power of an idea, no matter how small. Emotions are the fuel that feeds those sparks. You can have a fleeting thought with no consequences, like a match that burns out in seconds. But if you accompany it with emotion, that match lights up dry branches and begins to spread. That is how our deepest beliefs work. They are thoughts that manage to catch fire thanks to sustained emotion. And like any fire, they produce heat, light, and direction. To understand how the mind can turn the same stimulus into two opposite experiences, it is enough to look at a simple example from everyday life. Think of the shadow of a tree. One person may see it as shelter, coolness, and rest in the midst of heat. Another may perceive it as a dark, unsettling place where danger might lurk. The tree is the same, the shadow is the same. What changes is the emotional interpretation the mind makes of that image. This is how it happens with every situation in life. The facts are neutral, but the energy we project onto them determines whether they become relief or threat, blessing or burden. Ancient cultures understood this principle and incorporated it into their way of life. For the Mayans, each day was not simply a date on the calendar, but a living entity with its own energy and character. They believed that days had souls. Some were auspicious for sowing, others for resting. Some carried abundance, others introspection. Even if today we may see it as superstition, behind that practice lies a deep intuition. Human beings project energy into time and receive a response from it. In a way, by treating each day as a living being, the Mayans trained their minds to live with greater awareness of the energy that permeated their actions. That same energy also reveals itself in creativity. Think of Mozart, the child prodigy. It is said that, as a very young boy, he could hear a musical piece just once and then rewrite it from memory with astonishing precision. It was not only innate talent, but an exceptional sensitivity to capture the energy of the notes and translate them into symbols. While other children memorized games or songs, he experienced music as a living current he could reproduce effortlessly. His example reminds us that creativity is not merely a rational act, but a channeling of emotional energy that transforms into work. The same happens with us in daily life. We may not compose symphonies or found sacred calendars, but every emotion we sustain is a current of energy that steers the direction of our thoughts. When a person repeats worrisome thoughts with a background of fear, that energy accumulates until it becomes chronic anxiety. When another repeats thoughts of gratitude with a background of trust, that energy accumulates until it becomes serenity. Thought is the spark, but emotion is the wind that decides whether the flame expands or dies out. This is where metaphysical practice offers us a practical path. Instead of repressing negative emotions, it is about recognizing them as signals that we are feeding the wrong spark. Fear, anger, or sadness are not enemies. They are alarms warning us that our energy is being directed toward an undesired creation. Instead of judging them, we can observe them and consciously decide which spark we want to keep fueling. This does not mean denying pain or faking joy when we do not feel it. It means learning to recognize the creative power of emotion and using it in favor of what we want. Just as a musician learns to give nuance to a note to convey beauty, we can learn to shade our emotions to direct energy toward constructive experiences. Remember, every thought is a spark, and every emotion is the wind that expands it. The shadow of a tree can be relief or threat, depending on the filter of your mind. The Mayans treated each day as a living entity because they knew the energy with which they looked at it determined its quality. Mozart, with his prodigious sensitivity, reminds us that emotional energy can be transformed into eternal art. If you bring all these teachings together, the message is clear. Your emotions are not accidents, they are creative engines. When you direct them consciously, they become allies. When you leave them unchecked, they turn into wildfires. So the next time you feel a strong emotion, do not despise it or repress it. Ask yourself, which spark am I feeding with this? Do I want this fire to light up my life or to consume it? That single question can make the difference between living as a victim of your emotions or as a conscious creator of your experience. Chapter 10. Symbols as Keys to the Mind. Human beings are, above all, creators of symbols. We do not think in raw form. We think in images, words, metaphors that condense meaning and allow us to organize experience. From cave paintings to the emojis in a digital message, our minds have always needed mediators to translate the invisible into something comprehensible. Thomas Aquinas expressed it clearly more than 700 years ago. There is nothing in the mind that has not first passed through the senses. Everything we know, everything we are capable of imagining, first enters as perception, a sound, a color, a texture, a scent. Then that experience transforms into symbols that we use to think and communicate. Hence the importance of understanding that symbols are not harmless ornaments. They are keys that open and close doors in our unconscious. Imagine a lake. If the water is clear, it reflects the mountains, the sky, and the trees around it with precision. But if the water is murky, what appears on the surface are distorted, deformed, unrecognizable images. The same happens with our mind. If the symbols we feed it are clear, inspiring, and full of meaning, they will reflect reality faithfully and transform it into possibilities. If the symbols are filled with fear, confusion, or violence, the reflection we receive will be a twisted version of life. The water of the mind can be clear or murky, depending on the symbols we cast into it. That is why all cultures have developed symbolic systems. Human beings intuited from very early on that certain images, rituals, and objects had the ability to influence the deep mind. The Norse peoples, for example, used runes not only as an alphabet, but as magical keys. They carved signs into small pieces of wood and then threw them into the fire. They believed that by doing so, they released the energy of the symbol and sent it into the invisible world to act. It was not empty superstition, it was a way of condensing into a visible gesture, a desire, an intention, a belief. Watching the runes burn, the mind received the signal that something had been delivered, released, or decreed. That power of symbols remains in our modern life, even if we sometimes fail to recognize it. Do we not wear amulets, use logos, repeat phrases that motivate us? All of these are symbols acting upon our unconscious. A logo can awaken trust or rejection. A gesture can communicate more than a speech. A repeated word can engrave itself in memory like a silent command. However, there is a delicate aspect. Symbols can also manipulate us. Advertising, politics, even everyday conversations are full of symbols that penetrate our minds without filters. When we do not question them, they become automatic beliefs. And we already know that a belief can sustain us or chain us. History offers us examples of what happens when we try to force access to the deep mind instead of collaborating with it. Honoré de Balzac, the French novelist, is remembered both for his monumental works and for his excesses. To stay awake and write without rest, he was said to drink up to 40 cups of coffee in a single day. He believed that this way he kept his imagination alight and his mind in constant boil. And although he produced a vast body of literature, the cost was high: health problems, extreme exhaustion, and a short life. Balzac tried to force his mind with a powerful symbol, coffee, turned into fuel for creativity. But in the end, the overload took its toll. His story reminds us that symbols are indeed keys, but they are also forces that must be handled with balance. In the field of metaphysics, learning to use symbols consciously is learning to dialogue with the unconscious. An image that inspires you can become a constant reminder of your purpose. A phrase repeated with emotion can act as a command your deep mind obeys without question. A simple ritual, like writing down what you want to release and burning it, can be more effective than hours of reasoning because it speaks the direct language of the symbolic. This is not about superstition or magic in the trivial sense. It is about understanding that our mind responds more to images and emotionally charged acts than to rational arguments. If you want to convince someone, you can give them reasons, but if you want to inspire them, you give them a symbol, a story, a metaphor, a gesture that condenses a universe in an instant. In the same way, if you want to re-educate your unconscious mind, it is not enough to tell it, "Be positive." It needs clear symbols, visualizing a scene of success, repeating a word of power, surrounding yourself with objects that evoke the life you desire. Just as clear water reflects without distortion, your clear mind needs vivid symbols that guide its reflection. At their core, symbols are bridges between the visible and the invisible. They allow us to translate what we feel into something we can handle, and they help us plant messages in the unconscious that would otherwise be lost. That is why the ancients carved runes, built totems, painted caves. And that is why we still fill our daily lives with symbols, from the rings we wear to the phrases we repeat in silence. The lesson is clear. Do not underestimate the symbols you choose. Each one is a key that opens doors in your mind. Some lead to dark hallways, others to luminous rooms. You decide which keys to carry with you. Remember Aquinas, who warned us that everything entering the mind first passes through the senses. Remember the clear water that reflects and the murky water that distorts. Remember the Norse casting runes into fire to give shape to the invisible. And remember Balzac, forcing his unconscious with coffee until exhaustion. Each of these examples reminds us that symbols are powerful, and that our true challenge is not to avoid using them, but to learn to use them consciously. If you do, you will discover that symbols are more than ornaments. They are keys capable of opening the deepest doors of your mind, and with them, the doors of your destiny. Chapter 11. Creative Silence and Meditation. The human mind resembles a mighty river that never stops. Day and night it flows with thoughts, memories, worries, desires. That constant current can either sweep us away or nourish us, depending on how we learn to relate to it. In the midst of that torrent, silence is not absence. It is an act of creation, a fertile space where the mind ceases to chase every stimulus and begins to reflect what is essential. An ancient metaphysical principle summarizes it precisely. The law of life is the law of belief. And beliefs do not arise from noise, but from what we manage to imprint deep within. Meditation and conscious silence are the tools that allow us to cleanse the surface of the mind so that those fundamental beliefs can reveal themselves and be transformed. Imagine a completely dark room. For a time it seems there is nothing there. Yet as soon as a ray of light enters through a crack, you begin to see shapes, objects, colors. It is not that those objects appeared with the light. They were always there, hidden by the lack of clarity. The same happens with the mind. When it is agitated, we perceive only noise, confusion, shadows. When it calms, the deeper contents emerge with clarity, and we can see them for what they are. Meditation is, in this sense, the crack of light that turns a dark room into a revelatory space. The ancients knew that silence was more than rest. It was method. Pythagoras, for example, recommended a curious exercise to his disciples. Before going to sleep, they had to review the day backwards, from the last action to the first. This practice had several purposes: to train memory, to purify the mind of unnecessary impressions, and to observe actions with detachment. By doing it in silence, the student cultivated the ability to view his own experiences as an observer rather than remain trapped in them. Pythagoras understood that a calm mind, like the illuminated room, reveals details that go unnoticed in the midst of noise. In the modern world, we often reduce meditation to a relaxation technique, and while it certainly relaxes, its deeper function is another: to open a creative space. It is not only about stopping noise, but about allowing the deep mind to begin reorganizing itself, generating new associations, revealing insights. It is in silence that the most powerful ideas are born, because the unconscious finds there the freedom to speak without the interruption of constant thought. The story of Marie Curie offers us an example of how even in the most rigorous science, silence and patient observation are fundamental. It is said that in the early days of her research on radioactivity, she would carry small tubes of radium salts in her pocket, fascinated by the faint glow they emitted in the dark. There were no sophisticated laboratories or advanced machines, only the silent attention of a woman observing a new phenomenon. Those nights when she contemplated with wonder the dim glow of her tubes were, unknowingly, moments of scientific meditation, of immersion in the creative silence that would lead her to revolutionary discoveries. That glow in her pocket resembles the spark that arises in our minds when we learn to become still. It may be faint at first, barely perceptible, but it contains transformative energy. What we see in calm is not always immediate or grand, but it opens a direction that later expands into life. Creative silence is not about emptying the mind as if leaving it blank. That would be as impossible as stopping a river completely. It is rather about observing the flow without being swept away by it. With practice, the turbulent waters settle and the current becomes clear. Then, what once seemed chaos reveals a hidden order. Some fear silence because they believe it is emptiness, but in reality, it is the opposite. It is fullness. In it, we discover that the mind is not made only of passing thoughts, but also of a vast space capable of containing them. That space is where the deepest beliefs germinate and where we can rewrite them. Daily practice does not need to be complicated. Just a few minutes of stillness each day, sitting, breathing, letting thoughts come and go without clinging to them. That simple action, repeated, gradually transforms the quality of the mind. The same as with a dark room illuminated, the same as Pythagoras taught, or as Marie Curie intuited in her contemplation. The essential reveals itself in silence. In metaphysics, we say that silence is creative because it is there where what later blossoms in daily life is planted. When a belief is introduced in that state of calm, it takes root much more deeply than when repeated in the midst of noise. Meditation then becomes the fertile soil in which to plant the images, symbols, and phrases we want to see materialized. Remember, the law of life is the law of belief. And the most powerful beliefs are not engraved in agitation, but in calm. The dark room illuminated, the Pythagorean review of the day, the glow of a radium tube in Marie Curie's pocket. 3 different examples teaching us the same thing. Silence is not emptiness, but revelation. There we find the possibility of reordering the mind, of recognizing what we truly believe, and of sowing what we want to believe. If you ever doubt the value of pausing for a few minutes in silence, think of this. Every moment of calm is like opening a window in the mind, and through that window can enter the light that transforms your entire life. Chapter 12. The Paradox of Destiny and Freedom. From the beginning, human beings have wrestled with 2 seemingly opposing certainties. On the one hand, the idea of a written destiny, a greater web that surrounds us. On the other, the conviction that we are free to choose our path. The paradox is evident. If everything is predetermined, what role does freedom play? And if everything depends on our choice, does something called destiny even exist? The Stoics, masters of serenity in the face of life, offered an answer that still resonates. Fate leads the willing and drags the unwilling. Within this phrase lies profound wisdom. Destiny, understood as the set of universal laws and rhythms of existence, cannot be avoided. But it can be lived in 2 ways, as a current that propels us when we flow with it, or as a storm that drags us when we resist. Freedom, then, is not the denial of destiny, but the choice of how we relate to it. A simple example illustrates this. Imagine a colossal bridge, capable of supporting tons of vehicles each day. What gives it strength is not the visible arches or the asphalt we tread, but the invisible balance between opposing forces, gravity and tension, weight and support. If one of those forces were to disappear, the bridge would collapse. The same is true with faith and destiny. Faith is trust in that invisible balance that sustains our life. We do not see the universal laws at work, but we know they are there, supporting every step we take. Our freedom lies in walking with confidence across the bridge, instead of paralyzing ourselves with doubt over whether it will hold. Ancient philosophy left us paradoxes that still unsettle the rational mind. Zeno of Elea proposed one of the most famous, the paradox of the arrow. According to him, at every precise instant of time, the arrow is motionless in one point of space, and if at every instant it is still, how is it possible that it moves? Though modern logic and mathematics offer explanations, the paradox preserves a symbolic message. What seems fixed may contain movement, and what seems to move may conceal stillness. Destiny and freedom function in a similar way. In every moment of our lives, it seems we are at a fixed point, a circumstance, a situation. Yet at the same time, there is an invisible motion carrying us forward. What we call destiny is that trajectory. What we call freedom is the way we choose to experience each instant of stillness in motion. Paradoxes are not obstacles, but doors to deeper understanding. And when we realize that destiny and freedom are not opposites but complements, our relationship with life changes completely. We no longer feel like victims of an unchangeable script, nor do we lose ourselves in the illusion of absolute control. We discover that we are navigators on a river that already has its course. We can row with greater or lesser force, choose which shore to approach, even pause for a while, but we cannot deny the current. The story of Connie Mendez, pioneer of metaphysics in Latin America, offers a revealing anecdote. Her famous Little Blue Book, Metaphysics 4 in 1, circulated hand to hand for decades. Many readers recounted that when they opened it at random, the pages seemed to respond precisely to what they needed at that moment. Was it coincidence? Was it destiny? Was it simply the mind focusing on what it sought? The truth is that this repeated experience gave the impression that a silent guidance existed, a synchronicity that connected the reader's need with the indicated page. That anecdote shows how destiny can manifest in everyday details, and how freedom lies in interpreting those signs with openness instead of discarding them as mere chance. If we accept that destiny and freedom coexist, life ceases to be a contradictory puzzle and becomes a dance. Destiny sets the music, the cycles of nature, the universal laws, the circumstances beyond our control. Freedom sets the steps, how we respond, what attitude we adopt, what beliefs we choose to sustain. The same destiny can be lived as tragedy or as teaching, depending on the choreography we decide to dance. Metaphysics insists that the essence lies in belief. If we believe we are slaves to a rigid script, we will act like prisoners. If we believe that every circumstance is an opportunity to choose, we will act like co-creators. Both visions produce different realities, even though the riverbed is the same. Remember the bridge. It does not hold by miracle, but by invisible forces in balance. Remember Zeno's arrow. Stillness and movement are inseparable. Remember Connie Mendez's Little Blue Book. What seems like chance may be guidance. And remember the Stoics. Destiny can guide you if you flow with it, or drag you if you stubbornly resist. The challenge is to accept that we will never have absolute control, but we will always have the freedom of interpretation and action within the current. There lies our true strength, in learning to read the signs of destiny without ceasing to exercise our freedom to respond. When you achieve this, the paradox ceases to frighten and becomes consolation. You discover that your life is neither a chain of accidents nor an iron prison, but a journey in which the river and the navigator need each other. Destiny marks the course. Your freedom decides the experience of the journey. Chapter 13. Resonance and Attraction. One of life's most intriguing principles is that whatever we focus our energy on seems to multiply. Some call it the law of attraction. Others understand it as resonance, but all agree that there is a close relationship between what we carry within and what appears outside. What you feel and think does not remain inside you. It vibrates, expands, and creates correspondences in your environment. The Book of Job, one of the oldest texts of the biblical tradition, contains in a brief phrase a truth that still shakes us today. What I feared has come upon me. Job is not speaking of superstitions, but of a universal principle. The mind that obsesses over an image, whether of fear or of hope, ends up attracting experiences consistent with that image, not because of divine punishment, but because the vibration of fear, repeated and sustained, creates the conditions for that very thing to happen. We can better understand this with a simple example. Imagine an old radio with a manual dial. You can turn the knob up or down, but you will only clearly hear the station tuned to the exact frequency. The other frequencies exist, but you do not capture them. That is how our mind works. Infinite possibilities exist around us, but we only strongly attract what vibrates at the same frequency we do. If your mind is tuned to the frequency of fear, you will pick up news, people, and situations that reinforce that fear. If you tune it to trust, you will find signs and opportunities that reinforce that trust. Resonance is not magic, it is selection. This principle of resonance also manifests in nature. Simple experiments have shown that plants react differently depending on the kind of music they receive. Soft classical music favors their growth, while harsh sounds, such as certain styles of very aggressive rock, tend to wither them. It is not that plants prefer a genre, but that certain vibrations generate harmony and others disorder. The same happens with our lives. Harmonious thoughts and emotions strengthen us, while chaotic vibrations wear us down. The philosopher and mathematician Blaise Pascal understood in his own way the importance of keeping the mind at the right frequency. It is said that he carried inside his hat a small piece of paper with spiritual reminders written in his own hand. He did not do it to show it off, but so that each time he removed his hat, he would recall the essentials: his faith, his purpose, his commitment to the transcendent. That simple gesture was an act of resonance, a physical symbol that reinforced in his mind the vibration he wished to sustain. Consciously or not, he was tuning his inner radio to the frequency of trust and devotion. Resonance explains why certain people seem to attract the same experiences over and over. It is not a hidden mystery nor a cruel destiny. It is that their mind has become accustomed to a frequency, and so their life fills with examples of that vibration. Someone who believes they are always betrayed will repeatedly find signs of disloyalty because they are tuned to that station. Someone who trusts in the goodness of life will discover opportunities even in the midst of difficulty. The paradox is that this principle works both for what we desire and for what we fear. Job understood it. To fear intensely is, in a way, to attract what we fear. That is why metaphysical practice insists on re-educating the mind, not only to imagine what is desired, but also to release the obsession with what is unwanted. How can we apply this in practice? First, by recognizing the frequency we are tuned to most of the time. Are your predominant thoughts tinged with complaint, worry, or resentment? That is the station you are tuned to. Or are they filled with gratitude, hope, and trust? That is another frequency, and it will produce different results. The first step is to observe honestly what mental music resonates in you each day. The second step is to learn to readjust the dial. Just as it is not enough to wish to hear a different station without turning the knob, It is not enough to wish for new experiences if you keep feeding the same thoughts. Readjusting means deliberately changing the focus, introducing symbols, practices, phrases, or gestures that remind you of the vibration you want to sustain. Pascal did it with a piece of paper in his hat. You can do it with a notebook of affirmations, a nightly visualization, or a daily ritual. What matters is not the form, but the consistency. The third step is to trust that resonance will attract what corresponds in its own time. It is not always immediate. Sometimes life takes time to respond because the vibration must consolidate. Just as a radio takes a few seconds to capture a station clearly when the dial is off, the mind needs time to stabilize in a new frequency. Patience is part of the process. Resonance and attraction do not mean that everything in your life is under absolute control, but they do mean that much of what you experience depends on the frequency you sustain. You cannot control the existence of storms, but you can control the quality of your vessel and the direction of your rudder. And that quality and direction are defined by what you think, what you feel, and what you believe. Remember the book of Job and its warning about fear fulfilled. Remember the radio that only tunes to the frequency it is set on. Remember the plants that respond to harmony or chaos in music. And remember Pascal reinforcing his faith with a simple paper hidden in his hat. All teach us the same. The mind attracts what resonates with it. The final question is inevitable. On what frequency are you living now? Because what you attract depends less on what you desire and more on what you vibrate. Chapter 14. Transforming Beliefs into Abundance. Abundance does not begin with money in your pocket or with accumulated possessions, but with an inner state. Everything external that we perceive as prosperity is the consequence of an invisible fabric, our beliefs. If these are fertile, open, and trusting, the material flows as a reflection. If they are barren, limiting, and filled with fear, the external becomes a desert. An old saying summarizes it with simplicity and precision. Gain confidence in yourself, and you have already won half the battle. It is not about naive optimism or magical formulas, but about understanding that inner confidence is the seed that determines the fruit. The other half of success, the part that comes from the outside, can only grow when it finds prepared soil within. The example of a crop explains it better than any theory. A farmer may plow the land, water it carefully, and protect it from pests. But if the seed he plants is of poor quality, the fruit will be meager. In the same way, we may strive to work, study, or seek opportunities. But if the deep belief we sow is, "I don't deserve to prosper," or "there is never enough," the result will be scarce. Life does not give us what we ask for superficially, but what we sow in the depths. That is why true transformation toward abundance begins within. Ancestral cultures knew this and developed ways to engrave expansive beliefs in the mind. The Polynesian navigators, for example, crossed vast oceans without maps or compasses. How did they manage it? Through songs. They memorized the night sky, star by star, and turned it into melodies they could repeat from generation to generation. Thus, each voyage was accompanied by songs containing precise instructions for orientation. It was not just a practical method, it was also an act of trust. Singing those stars was equivalent to believing that the ocean was navigable, that the route existed, and that they could find it. The song not only guided their canoe, it nourished their minds with certainty of abundance, with faith that the resources to arrive were already present. We too navigate oceans, though not of water, but of thoughts, emotions, and opportunities. And we also need inner songs, phrases, symbols, practices that remind us that abundance exists and that we can reach it. Without that song, we lose direction and fall prey to doubt. The word, in this sense, is both seed and rudder. In West Africa, the griots, guardians of oral memory, held an almost sacred respect for the power of words. They said that a wrongly used word could sicken a person or even an entire village. That belief was not superstition. It was the understanding that what we say generates resonances in the collective mind. A repeated insult can break someone's confidence. A malicious rumor can divide communities. And conversely, a just word can heal wounds and unite hearts. The same happens within us. The words we say to ourselves daily, those phrases we repeat almost without noticing, create the atmosphere in which we live. If our inner voice is that of a griot who curses, we will become sick with scarcity. If it is that of a griot who blesses, we will attract abundance. Transforming beliefs into abundance is not, then, a mere superficial change of discourse. It is a deep process that involves 3 steps. The first is to identify the seeds we have been planting without realizing it. Listen to your most common thoughts about money, opportunities, relationships. Do you say, "It's never enough," "Life is hard," "The rich are bad"? Those are seeds of scarcity. Recognition is like observing what crop you have right now. You cannot transform it if you do not see what is there. The second step is to deliberately replace those seeds with more fertile ones. Just as the farmer carefully chooses what he plants, you can choose phrases, images, and practices that introduce new beliefs. It may be an affirmation repeated calmly, a symbol in your home that reminds you of abundance, a simple ritual of daily gratitude. Every word, every gesture is a seed that the unconscious collects. The third step is to patiently care for the new crop. Do not expect immediate fruits. The farmer does not despair the day after sowing. He knows the process requires time, water, and sun. In the same way, beliefs need repetition, trust, and coherence with your actions. If you believe in abundance but act with fear, the seed weakens. If you believe and also act in coherence, the fruit will come. Abundance is not a stroke of luck, but the result of conscious sowing. And that sowing always begins in the mind. Remember the proverb, "Half of success lies in confidence in yourself." Remember the crop that produces only according to the seed planted. Remember the Polynesians singing stars to cross the ocean. Remember the griots who knew a word could heal or sicken a village. All point to the same truth. Your beliefs are keys. If you orient them towards scarcity, they will open doors of lack. If you orient them toward abundance, they will open doors of prosperity. The challenge is not to convince the world to give you more, but to convince your mind that you can already receive. When you achieve that, life responds with synchronicities, opportunities, and fruits that once seemed impossible. And so, step by step, you will transform your inner garden into a fertile field of abundance. Chapter 15. The Awakening of the Creative Being. The journey through the mind, metaphysics, and beliefs brings us to a decisive point: the recognition that we are not mere spectators of life, but active creators of it. Awakening as a creative being means assuming that what we think, feel, and do has an echo reflected in our environment. It is no longer just about surviving or reacting, but about living with the awareness that every instant is an opportunity to shape reality. Mayan wisdom condensed this vision into a luminous phrase: "In Lak'ech, I am another you, and you are another me." This teaching reminds us that creation is not an isolated act, but a shared one. What I think and do not only affects me, but also others, because we are all intertwined in the same web of existence. To be a creator is to recognize oneself as part of a whole where each spark ignites another. A simple example illustrates it. Imagine one flame lighting another candle, and then another, and then thousands more. The first flame does not lose its light. On the contrary, it multiplies in every new flame it kindles. This is how the creative being functions. By sharing your inspiration, your kindness, your knowledge, you do not empty yourself, you expand. Creativity, compassion, and abundance are not depleted when given, they multiply. This is one of life's deepest secrets. The more you give from the essential, the more you receive. The creative awakening is not achieved overnight. It requires training of perception, a habit of reflection, and a willingness to recognize one's own responsibility. In Japan, for centuries, there existed a practice called naikan, which literally means looking within oneself. Each night, those who practiced it asked themselves 3 questions. What have I received today? What have I given today? What difficulties have I caused? These questions, repeated day after day, train the mind to recognize interdependence and to assume that every action is a form of creation that affects others. Naikan was not a simple examination of conscience, but a method to awaken the inner creator that acts constantly, consciously or not. Awakening as a creative being also means remembering that it does not matter where you begin, but how you choose to respond to what life gives you. The story of Michael Faraday demonstrates this clearly. Born into a humble family in England, he worked from childhood binding books. While carrying out his work, he secretly read the pages in his hands. That silent contact with knowledge awakened in him an insatiable curiosity that would lead him to become one of the greatest scientists in history, a pioneer in the study of electromagnetism. Faraday was not born with privilege or a destiny written in golden letters. He was born with the creative spark we all carry within, and he knew how to nurture it with discipline and passion. His story reminds us that the awakening of the Creator does not depend on external circumstances, but on how we choose to make use of them. This awakening also demands a new way of relating to others. If you truly understand that I am another you and you are another me, then every word and every gesture you give is also a form of shared creation. Your thoughts toward others, whether of appreciation or judgment, influence not only your life, but also the common atmosphere we all breathe. To awaken is to understand that we cannot separate our destiny from that of those around us. The creative being lives with awareness, but also with humility. They know they do not control everything, but they do control their sowing. They do not choose the winds, but they do choose how to set their sails. They recognize that every emotion and every belief is a material with which they build their future, and that is why they choose carefully which seeds to plant in their mind, which symbols to nourish, and which thoughts to cultivate. When you awaken as a creator, you stop waiting for circumstances to change before you feel whole. You begin to understand that fullness arises from within you, and that by projecting it, circumstances begin to transform. You no longer see life as a battlefield where you must defend yourself, but as a blank canvas where each day you paint with your actions and thoughts. Remember the flame that lights others without losing its glow. Such is your creative power. Remember the Japanese naikan and its invitation to review what was given and received each day. This is how you train your mind to create consciously. Remember Faraday, binding books in silence and discovering in them the spark that would lead him to illuminate the world with science. This is how you can ignite your own spark, regardless of your starting point. And remember the ancestral voice of the Mayans, in Lak'ech, I am another you, and you are another me. This reveals that your creation is not only yours, but belongs to all, because we are all part of the same flame. The awakening of the creative being is not an end, but a beginning. It is the start of a life lived with awareness, gratitude, and responsibility. A life in which you choose to sow trust instead of fear, to share light instead of hiding it, and to create abundance instead of repeating scarcity. That awakening is within your reach right now, in the very instant you decide to see your mind as a creative workshop and your heart as a flame that never goes out.